afternoon, everyone. So, how was lunch? I cannot hear anyone. It's like no one had lunch. How was lunch? Heavy. It was not good? Okay. Extremely good. Okay. So, let's get started. I am Abhinandan. I am developer at Codignition. In last 1 year, I was working on Rails, Angular, and other JavaScript frameworks. So, in the morning keynote session, Nick mentioned about you have to be part of some recreational activity. So, I play Ingress. It is an augmented reality game from Google, and my handle is nandex64. Anyone here who plays Ingress? Great. Let's catch up after the event. We'll hack some voters around. I've combined Ingress with cycling. Since I love cycling, so I've combined Ingress with it. Also, I'm part of Noida Cycling Club there in Noida, and we go around for rides to different nearby places. The most passionate thing in my life is my lifestyle itself. So, I'm a vegan, and I only take the whole food, or what you call plant-based nutrition. By plant-based I mean no roots at all, no onions or garlics or anything. Also, I follow organic lifestyle, that is no chemicals or any preservatives or processed foods at all. No tea, no coffee or any drinks of any kind or any junk food. So, this is my lifestyle. How many of you are not a Rails developer and don't know what this is? Anyone? Rest of all, you already be knowing that this is the conventional structure where we place assets in our application. So, we have two folders, one is app assets and another is vendor assets. What are assets? I have already shown you in my introduction if you have noticed. So, these are the assets: HTML, then CSS, then images and JavaScript. So, these are the four types of assets or building blocks of any web application. So, this is the structure which Rails provides us. What is the problem with, what are the various problems with this structure? Can I use this structure in my production? So, can we have mic here in the audience? It's like, okay. Can anyone tell me what are the various problems associated with this structure if I use the same structure to deploy assets in production? My JavaScripts and CSS files. Anyone? Yes, dependency management. Anything else? Anyone? Okay, all right. I had one of the option, that is dependency management. So, I'll speak about what are the various problems. So, first problem is the web applications are becoming more and more media rich day by day. So, the assets are increasing. So, we are having more images, more JavaScript files and style sheets. So, the problem this causes is that we have to manage those assets. Second, as he already mentioned, dependency management. We have JavaScript and UI frameworks evolving. New JavaScript frameworks are coming. So, these are causing more and more dependency problems in Rails. So, we need something to manage these dependencies, third-party dependencies. Next is size. As assets are growing, also the size of these assets are growing. So, whenever a browser requests for a web page, the assets which are delivered with them are of much more larger size than they were few years back. So, that also affects the performance of our web application, and also it creates increased network utilization. So, overall it impacts performance of our web application. So, is there any solution to all this problem? One single solution? Yes, that is Rails Asset Pipeline. Before going into how Rails Asset Pipeline solves these four problems, I'll speak about what is Rails asset pipeline, and then we'll go deeper into it, how it solves the problems. So what is Rails asset pipeline? Rails asset pipeline is a rack-based Ruby library which was developed in Ruby version 3.1. It was introduced in Ruby version 3.1 to manage, pre-process and serve web assets in the Rails application. Since Rails version 4, it is extracted out into a separate gem, that is Sprocket Rails. And so why it is used? Because it helps us to solve all these problems and makes life easier. Not only it improves the performance of the web application in production, but also for developers, it makes their life easier. For how does it do that? I'll show you in my next slides. So this was the structure which we have, and after using Rails asset pipeline, this transforms into this. So what is the magic that goes behind it, and how is it transformed into this? What are the different processes which are done behind? Let's get into them step by step. So first one is concatenation. I'll show you this with a demo. I hope this is visible to everyone. So here I am creating a new Rails application. When we create a new Rails application, asset pipeline is enabled by default, and the gems, Sprocket Rails and others are automatically included. Also, if there are two manifest files, first one is application.js and second one is application.css. This is the place where we include our dependencies, the JavaScript or style sheets. So we use them with the help of a directive, that is required directive. So if you want to include, for example, I have included jQuery, Angular, Bootstrap. So you simply have to do require jQuery and the whole jQuery dependency is used. Similarly for style sheets, here in style sheets, I have included Bootstrap CSS. So everything what we write here in manifest file is processed by Rails asset pipeline. We need not to figure anything out. Rails asset pipeline automatically resolves all the dependencies. The order in which we write also matters, because these are processed from top to bottom. Along with this, I simply have to place my third-party dependencies inside the vendor asset folder. So after all dependencies are written here and placed inside vendor asset, when I start my Rails application, this is without the pre-compilation step which Rails asset pipeline does. So I have here in my console, the browser console, all the dependencies are included, the Angular, Bootstrap, jQuery and all. These are included into separate files, and also you will notice that there are separate network requests for all of these files. Here all these green lines are one request for each of this one file. So how concatenation helps us? I have included another CSS and use this CSS into an HTML page. Now I'll process this using pre-compilation step. So here I do rake asset precompile, and again I start my Rails server. So all those different CSS and JS files are now into one single CSS or one single JS file. So this is concatenation. And how is it beneficial? For a medium sized web application, there were 843 network requests, or when I want to load one single page, there were 843 network requests that were going behind. And after using concatenation or asset pipeline, it reduced down to only 6 requests. Next, asset pipelines does is the minification and compression. I'll show you a demo of this again. So what happens in minification is, this is my CSS file. It's the normal CSS which we write, and it has comments and white spaces in it. So what minification does is, it trims away all the comments, extra lines or the white spaces, and after minification I'll show you the resultant CSS and JavaScript files. So this is the CSS file after minification. The application.css, the single file which is found. So it is into one single line and like not readable by at least programmers. So, and this is the JS file. In case of JS file, one more thing happens, that is uglification. So the variables are renamed. Previously, while writing our code, we have good names for our variables in JavaScript. So it uglifies them into like smaller names. For example, here single alphabets are used, E or S or something. So this is called as minification. This again helps us to reduce the file size. Even after minification, there is one more step that is performed, that is compression. So after asset pre-compilation, we'll look at, so here is the minified file, JS file, and you can see along with it there is a js.gz file which is of much smaller, what do you call, the size. So here the file is also compressed. How minification and compression is beneficial? Loading time for one single page before minification and compression was 10.2 seconds for a medium size web application with lots and lots of JavaScripts and all. And after we use minification and compression or the Rails asset pipeline, that is reduced down to 2.8 seconds. Also, previously the asset size was that was delivered to the browser was of like let's say 24 MB, which was then reduced to 6 MB. Last or the one more step that asset pipelines does is, I'll show you demo again for this. Fingerprinting. What is fingerprinting? Before fingerprinting, we can see this file names as simply application.js or application.css. After fingerprinting, Rails append this file with a application dash random string.js or random string.css. This is there to provide consistent file name based on the content. So this is a hash of the file content. Whenever the content of the file changes, this number changes. So the name of this JS or CSS, the assets changes. How is it beneficial? It is beneficial in two aspects. First, it helps us in automated versioning. So whenever a new content is added into JS or CSS, automatically a newer version of file is found. We need not to like maintain the versioning separately. Second, when browser requests for a web page, the assets are delivered, and since the assets were changed at the server, so now browser has to request for the newer assets, and it discards the local cached assets. This is also called as cache bursting. So also for developers, as I mentioned, Rails asset pipeline is good as it allows developers to write their style sheet in let's say SASS and SCSS, which during the pre-compilation step is converted into CSS. Similarly, you can write your JavaScript code in CoffeeScript or TypeScript, which is ultimately converted into JS before like sending it to the browser. Also, we can use any of this templating stuff, ERB or Haml or Slim, and this is again converted into HTML by Rails asset pipeline. So when we start working on Rails asset pipeline, if you try to include the JavaScript and CSS dependencies manually, then there are lots and lots of dependency management issues. So there are many gems for them. The most important one is, which I use, is Bower Rails. So we have today we have Bower packages for everything. So we simply use Bower Rails to include those Bower packages into a Rails application, and that are easily processed by the Rails asset pipeline. Also, if we are working on some specific framework like Angular or Amber or Bootstrap, etc., or Polymer, then we have gems for each of them. So my recommendation is, instead of manually, like if you are new to Rails or new to Rails asset pipeline, and if you are stuck in why this compilation, asset pre-compilation is not taking place, then it is recommended that you use this complementing gems to make your life easier. So I'd like to give example from my most recent project, which is there in production now. So when we started this project, so I'll just brief you about what this project is about. So this is a learning management system for our one of the clients, which is a education tech startup, and so we made this application in Angular, Polymer, and we used Google's material design, and the backend was Rails. So when we started, without using asset compilation or the Rails asset pipeline, the network requests were huge. So this is the production snapshot without Rails asset pipeline. So and the total time taken to load the index page or the first home page of the application was 10.92 seconds, and the number of networks requests were huge. See all these greens and blues lines, these are the network requests. And after introducing Rails asset pipeline in we introduced it in last month, and the changes were like drastic. So the time was reduced to 2.96 seconds, and number of network requests were also very less. So it is highly recommended that you use Rails asset pipeline. So to recap, Rails asset pipeline does the following steps: concatenation, minification, and compression, fingerprinting, and it helps developer to use any of the framework for HTML or CSS. And also we have very different gems for which are complementing to Rails asset pipeline. You can use them, and it helps us solve all these problems. That is, it reduces the asset quantity, and the file size, helps in better versioning of the assets, and helps developers write more better, cleaner and flexible code. So thank you so much. I hope in my small talk I made what happens behind Rails asset pipeline, and why is it beneficial to use them.
All right, thank you, Abhinandan. We are open for questions. Do we have any questions for Abhinandan? Yeah, here one.
Yeah, thanks Abhinandan for the presentation. Yeah, I had a question. You said in your project earlier you were not using the asset pipeline.
Yeah, so, we were not using.
So normally, when you use the Rails application, the asset pipeline comes along with it.
Yes,
so
yes.
How did you manage to do it without it?
So basically, I was having a hard time resolving the dependencies, and I did not knew about the gems and all this Angular Rails and Polymer Rails gem. I didn't knew about them. So then just to make the first version of the application, I tried to skip it. So to skip the asset pipeline, there inside the production.rb configuration file, we simply do asset config.assets. That is false. We set it to false. So that time I skipped it. After that, since the application was taking too much time to load, and then it was the only step which was left. So then I introduced that in my application. So I used these gems, Angular Rails and Polymer Rails. So those helped me to process those assets which I was unable to do them manually.
Yeah, thanks.